Okay, so the next thing I wanted to talk about in depth, because in one of my past videos, I made a video called Challenging Mental Illness, which I haven't watched since I posted it, which was about a month ago. And I want to explain my history in depth with mental illness. We'll see how it goes. So, this one might come across kind of like a timeline video. I might explain some stories, kind of the ways that I think when I'm having episodes, what I label my episodes, stuff that helped me to better understand what was going on with me mentally. And, how I got the diagnoses and kind of the relationships with other patients or psychiatrists or therapists or inpatient. I realized in my Living Open video, I said that I was put in the psych ward 4 times for 2 weeks at a time. I was mistaken. It was 5 times. There was one other time, and maybe I'll get into that. So this one I may edit because I got my first diagnosis in 2012, and it is 2020. So that's 8 years of history. So I might try to cut it down because this will be like the Living Open video, an hour and 20 minutes if I don't cut it down. So we'll see what happens though. So, like I said in my Living Open video, the first time that I got committed was 2012, and it was after a suicide attempt while I was in my military barracks. So, that story is in Living Open. I'll try to find the time tag if you're curious about it and put it on here, but so I went to the hospital the first time, and when I got there, the radical acceptance incident happened, all that happened, it's all in Living Open. But the diagnosis I didn't talk about so much. So I saw the psychiatrist, and I didn't know how the system really worked. So, sorry, I'm having racing thoughts, but I didn't know how the system worked. So what happened was I talked to the psychiatrist, and they didn't tell me my diagnosis or anything like that. I told them a little bit of my history and what had happened that got me put in the situation where I ended up committed. And the next day they were doing med call, and they called me, and I went up there and I said, I don't take meds. And they said, you do now? And I said, what do you mean I take meds? And so they gave me 2 meds. One of them was just an iron pill because they did a blood test and said that I was low in iron, nothing mental. But the second one was the first mood stabilizer I ever got put on. I got put on Lamictal. Okay. And so I asked them, I said, what is this? They said, it's Lamictal. And I said, what is it for? I was like, I wasn't told I was going to be put on medication. And they said, well, you got diagnosed with bipolar disorder type 2. So I was like, okay. I was like, but I don't want to take meds. And they said, well, med compliance is going to be part of your release. If you don't take the meds, you're going to be here longer. So I was like, okay, I'll just take them. And it wasn't too much of an issue for me because, as I talked about in my Living Open video, I did have a drug abuse history. So taking a pill wasn't like mind-changing for me. It was just, okay, cool. Doctors tell me to take it, I'll take it. So I did, and I started taking that. Sorry guys, this was a long time ago. I think it was twice a day. And if you've taken Lamictal, you know that they have to taper you up. So I was taking a small dose, and then I got up to the max dose, which I think, a long time ago, I think it was 200 milligrams or 250 milligrams. I can't be 100% sure. But it was the highest dose, okay? So the next day, I saw the psychiatrist again, and I said, why didn't you tell me that you diagnosed me with a mental illness? And he was kind of upset that they told me my diagnosis, and so I asked him why, and this kind of shaped my opinions on the labels, okay? I did make a labels video, if you want to watch that, but I understand the importance of labels, but I also feel like they are overused, and so I'm going to try to explain that real quick. So he said, I feel like the only people who need to know the diagnosis is the doctors. That way they can better understand how to treat the patient. But I don't like telling the patients their diagnosis, because then they start to take it on as their identity, and then they live their life through their diagnosis, okay? So he said, so I didn't want them to tell you. And he wasn't wrong, guys, because for a long time, probably still sometimes now, I still live my life through my diagnoses. Diagnoses? I still live my life through those, okay? Had they not told me the diagnosis and just treated me, would it maybe have taken me on a different path? Maybe. I don't know. So when it comes to labels, I do find them to be something that should be used with care and very carefully given out. So I learned that from him, because he was right. When I got out of the hospital, guys, I was Googling it, trying to understand it, trying to be the doctor myself rather than just trusting the doctor, which was fine. I learned a lot from it. I don't regret anything that happened, but I understand why some doctors don't want to tell you your diagnosis. All right. So that situation happened. Then back to the Living Open video. I was having more episodes. And what I refer to an episode, guys, is any behavior or way of thinking that's so out of the norm that it kind of just looks insane. And I'm using the labels because that's what people label it to understand it, right? It looked insane. So after I got out of the hospital, I had another episode on a military barracks, on the military base, where I ran away, right, under a bridge. I did talk about that one in Living Open. I'm not going to go over that again. So eventually, moving on, I got kicked out of the military for drug abuse, not mental instability. And I ended up, and since I'm just trying to stick with the mental stuff here, because I realize that I'm repeating some stuff I talked about in Living Open, but I'm trying to talk about the evolution of the mental illness and diagnosis, right? So after I got out, I did go to see a therapist once a week, and it was pretty cool, guys. They did, what is the name of that? I want to say DBT, but I don't think it was DBT. It's the one where they kind of hypnotize you and make you relive your past traumas, okay? So I did that with them, and the past traumas that they had me relive was, some stuff that happened in high school, and I didn't tell them about the incident in the hospital, so we didn't relive that, but they were also my therapist during the time of the sexual assault, right? So at some point, I got to relive that over and over again. And the reason I relived it, guys, was so that we could look at it different. Because even though the past happened, memories are one infallible, so you're allowed to change them. So we changed the way that I saw it, so then that way I could just cope with it better. That's all that was. So every time we did it, we would look at it different. So I did that with them, and that was really cool therapy. I enjoyed it. As much as you can enjoy therapy, it's stressful, right? So I didn't end up in the hospital again until after the sexual assault. And then that one, though, they diagnosed me with, so the first time it was bipolar disorder type 2, I think. And I have my medical records, but I don't want to be looking through papers, but type 2. So the second time I went to the hospital, they changed my diagnosis to bipolar disorder type 1. Right? So at that point, they put me on antidepressants as well. So, and the anti-anxiety meds. And I think I got put on antipsychotics at that time. But at that time, guys, it was a very low dose of antipsychotics. So it was to help with sleep. So it was Seroquel, which is an antipsychotic. When I first got put on it, I was only on 100 milligrams of Seroquel. So after I moved down to the place where I am now, I was on those medications, okay? And the diagnosis just stayed bipolar disorder type 1. All right? So I continued living my life. During this time, I was medicated. I was going to intensive outpatient and a psychiatrist and a therapist every week, okay? So I was seriously focusing on my mental health. while I was doing this, this is the time period of my life where I held a job for the longest amount of time, which was 2.5 years. Never called out. I was a really good employee, to the extent that I was capable, because I had also just gotten the hip surgery not long before that, so I was kind of confined to one area of work, which made it pretty much impossible to get promoted, which ultimately ended up why I quit, because I was starting to get frustrated with the lack of moving forward, which it is what it is. But on medication and with therapy, I had the longest success period, I'd say. All right. So, but while I was working there for the 2.5 years, I did have to take 2 weeks off work to go inpatient the third time. Now, I talked about this experience in my Breaking Religious Boundaries video and my Living Open video a little bit. So that was the first time that I hallucinated. And since I'm being honest, when I talk about the experiences that made me look insane, I will tell you the ones which drugs were involved, which sleep deprivation was involved, and which nothing seemed to play part in the episode, okay? So, the Breaking Religious Boundaries video, I talked about the hallucination I had where I saw my grandfather who had passed away years prior and a historical figure from the past, okay, and talk to them, right? So that one did involve marijuana, all right? I had smoked before the episode, but I ended up inpatient again because I did stay awake for 3 days, because 3 days after the hallucination, I did think that I was God, guys. And when I tell people that I thought I was God, they're like, oh, well, you thought you could do anything? And you guys, answer to that question is yes, I believe that I could do anything, but my mindset was also, I'm God, I don't have to do anything, so I just laid in bed feeling like God, okay? That was all that was. I didn't go around, like, doing what, I don't know what God people do. I just laid there thinking I was God. But also, I started to have this belief that everybody was a form of God, and I even thought my dog was a God, and I thought he was going to eat me because I was a bad God or whatever. During these 3 days, I also thought that being honest, okay, guys, I believe that I was Jesus reincarnate, okay? And everything that happened around me reinforced my delusion. And one of my other topics that I'm going to make in a video today is delusional thinking. So I'm going to talk about that. But everything that was happening around me just added to the delusion of me believing that I was Jesus reincarnate, okay? So during that 3-day time, something that I did was I had this Bible, and it's in one of those boxes somewhere. Maybe I'll pull it out one day. And you can call this mania. They labeled it mania when I told them what happened. But I highlighted every verse in the Bible that had anything to do with love, right? And after I did that, I called mega churches around where I was obsessively because they needed to let me speak at their church. Okay, like I had serious grandeur thinking that you need to hear what I have to say. So I was calling these mega churches, and I had this whole sermon prepared, guys, and I still know what it is. Which, the reason I keep hesitating on being like completely honest with the details is because I also, on one of my points, I want to talk about the pros and cons of being honest, okay? When I'm 100% honest with my past and my present and, kind of how I see my future, I do feel freer. I feel more open and like able to live because I'm not ashamed of who I am. But one of the cons of being honest, guys, is me being honest about some of the things that I think tends to make people angry. And just from experience, when you have God complexes or compare yourself to deities, people tend to get offended. And a lot of people, when they get offended, they react out of anger, okay? So being honest isn't always fun because there's a lot of backlash. And I want you guys to know I don't think I'm Jesus reincarnate. I don't think I'm a god. But sometimes when I'm having episodes, I do believe that, okay? That's why it's called mental illness. But again, I challenge mental illness because I'm going to explain that, hopefully. But because of these beliefs, it offends some people. Which, I'd say I'm sorry, but at the same time, I can't seem to help when I'm thinking like that. So, possibility of backlash if anybody watches this. I know I only have 22 subscribers right now, but if this ever goes anywhere, I'll accept the backlash for my delusional thinking. So my sermon was, okay, if you've been watching my videos, you know that at the time of the Jesus reincarnate God dual thing that was going on, I was identifying, more labels, as a lesbian. I think that was like the biggest thing that was contradicting my religious beliefs, was that I was gay. So I thought it happened for a reason, that I came up gay for a reason. In my delusion, I believe this. So what this sermon basically was I was going to go up to this church in front of all these people and talk just about love for like as long as I could, just going over just love, just love, just love. And then I was going to say, and this is who I am, and I am this, and this, you know, everything that they deem unworthy. And then I was going to ask, do you still love me, right? And this is what I was believing in my delusion, was depending on their reaction would determine if the end was going to begin or if we would just continue on the path that we were on now, right? So like if they verbally, physically attacked me, it was going to start the end. And if they accepted me, we were just going to continue on with our day like nothing happened. Like I was just some crazy person who went up to their church, right? So I was having this delusion for 3 days, and it got really exhausting, guys. And so I committed myself because I didn't want to do it anymore. It was exhausting. And when I am having delusions like that, I do realize that it's not normal from what I believe. Because part of me believes that a lot of people think like this and just don't talk about it. I might be wrong, though. I don't know, though. Because I know a lot of people who hear voices. I know a lot of people who have experiences. I know a lot of people who think that they're gods, okay? So I don't think it's completely abnormal, but it's not normal to talk about. Again, I don't think this anymore, but it is a constant foundation for my delusions, this spiritual or religious stuff, okay? And I might be able to explain why I think that is. Okay, so I got committed that time. And then that time when I went, they stuck with the bipolar type 1 diagnosis, but then they also added with psychotic tendencies. So they upped my Seroquel dose to an extremely high amount. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, you can't correct me, you don't have my medical records, but from what I was told was that the highest allowed dose for psychosis was 800 milligrams, and from what I recall, I was on 800 milligrams of Seroquel at some point, and it's because I wasn't sleeping, guys. I was staying awake for days at a time, just doing crazy stuff. So they put me on a really high dose of Seroquel, and then they added the psychotic tendencies onto my diagnosis, okay? So then, since they told me my new diagnosis, obviously, I obsessed over it, lived my life through that diagnosis, and it became my reason for why I acted abnormal. But I tried to stay in therapy and psychiatry and take my meds and just try to live like a stable life, a socially acceptable life, okay? So I did that for a little bit longer, and then I'm trying to remember what happened. My fourth one getting admitted, I think it was self-harm. Because, I mean, I had been doing that the whole time, but I think it got so to the point where they felt like I needed more attention. So I think that was what I went, was for self-harm. Bipolar disorder type 1 with psychotic tendencies was my diagnosis for about 2 years. It didn't change. It kind of just stayed that. And every time I went to the hospital, that was how they treated me, was they looked at my diagnosis, this is what you are, this is how we're going to treat it. So that was my label for a really long time. But after my fourth time with I can't remember why I went the fourth time, guys. It was either substance abuse, self-harm, or another episode, but it wasn't an episode that I can remember if that's what it was. So okay, so they sent me, and then in my Living Open video, I talked about my saving grace, the guy who sent me to a rehab center in California, okay? So while I'm in California, I start talking to a new therapist and a new psychiatrist. And I've had more therapists and psychiatrists than I can remember. I can't even remember all their names, but I can remember our experiences for the most part. I'm pretty sure there's some I just don't even remember. But I had a new therapist and a new psychiatrist, and my therapist was training to be a psychiatrist, so she looked at my stuff in depth. She really liked me because I was really honest with her about everything. So she looked at my stuff in depth, and she said, I think we need to change your diagnosis. And I said, okay, to what? And she said, schizoaffective disorder. So I was like, I don't know what that is. She said it's pretty much bipolar with psychosis, but the label is schizoaffective. And the reason I want to give you schizoaffective is because you keep having these episodes of delusional thinking and like hallucinating and hearing the voices and stuff. So I want to give you the schizoaffective label. I was like, okay. So I went and talked to the psychiatrist, and I said, we were talking and think that my diagnosis should be changed to schizoaffective. He said, definitely not. So I was like, okay, why do you think that? And he said, because I don't want to give you a diagnosis that is going to get you locked up for the rest of your life. Freaked me out, guys, because in the military, I started having this weird PTSD about being locked in buildings. So when he said locked up for the rest of your life, I was like, oh, no. Had a panic attack right there. Started crying. Like, I looked crazy. And he's like, no, you're going to be fine. We're just not going to put that to your diagnosis. That's not going to happen, right? So I was like, okay. So I went back to the therapist, and I said, he doesn't want to change my diagnosis because he doesn't want me to get locked up. And she got mad about that. She's like, just because you have a diagnosis doesn't mean they're going to lock you up. It's just a better way to treat you. So they talked, and they agreed that it should be my diagnosis, but that they're not going to put it on record. So when I speak to professionals, I tell them about that, but it is not on my record. So the schizoaffective diagnosis is something that I'm treated by, okay? So, continuing. I get out of rehab, I have the schizoaffective diagnosis, and I'm on all these meds. Alright, I'm 25 at this time. Now, where my parents were working, I was able to stay on their insurance until I turned 25, which was fantastic because, guys, with the mental illness and all the hip stuff that was going on, I have a lot of medical bills. Still, to this day, like, I can pull out my folder for you and show you all the bills that I've had, but since I was on my parents' insurance, it was easier to do that, right? So I was getting my meds covered. All I had was the copay, and I was still having the job. So everything was covered. But like I said, I ended up quitting the job after 2.5 years, not realizing that I was about to get off this insurance. Like, I knew I was, but I didn't really think that much about it because I was like, how are they going to put me on all these meds and just all this therapy and then just take me off because I don't have insurance anymore? Because, guys, I wasn't thinking straight. But then when reality started to hit that you're not going to have good insurance anymore to be able to afford this type of care, I was like, okay. So in my Living Open video, I did talk about how I ended up quitting cold turkey, which again, I do not suggest, do not do that. It's not safe. But I did do that. And part of the reason is, one, because, yeah, I was starting to feel like a zombie, but also because, guys, I was terrified that I was going to have to be taken off these meds whether I liked it or not because I couldn't afford it anymore. I couldn't find a job with enough insurance to get the health care, and I couldn't get the state-funded health care because of my record. They kept asking for more and more paperwork that, one, I either couldn't provide, or two, like, no matter how much I provided, they always wanted something else. I literally went for like 2 months trying to get this insurance just so I can stay on my medication, and it kept falling through. So by the time I turned 26, off my meds. No more therapy, no more counseling, no more psychiatry, nothing. Okay, so I was just now having to learn to be mentally stable without everything that's been supporting me this whole time, which I didn't mind. It wasn't so... Okay, from the outside looking in, guys, my life looks like a mess. I'm not going to lie. But I'm going to explain a little bit what that looks like off the meds. And I'm going to explain what my plan is now because I do want stability again. So what I've realized talking to a lot of people who know a little bit about schizophrenia and schizoaffective is that they have this idea of what it looks like. You know, the people who are like fighting their demons in the street that only they can see, or just constantly talking to the voices in their head and just like never being stable. And for a lot of people with that diagnosis, you guys, we do have points where I think they call it remission, where you are just fine. Okay? So obviously when I record my videos, I'm fine. I mean, I can still hear them sometimes, but guys, it's not like something that I let drown me, okay? I don't pay so much attention to it that I become obsessed with it until I do. So, oh, and I forgot, the 5th time I got committed, guys, was just because my psychiatrist was trying to help me change my meds because I got put on so many of them at a time that he wanted me to get taken off and put on the right ones, and he ended up dying. So they had to do a radical med change that I no longer had the person who was supervising him. So they had to put me in a hospital just to supervise my med change. That was all the 5th one was about. And during that med change, it was crazy, guys, because the psychosis was out of control. The voices were very loud, and they were very vicious and mean, and it wasn't fun. So, let's see here. I am 27 now, so I've been off my meds and without any supervision, therapy, counseling for almost a year and a half now. All right, so what my life has looked like since then with the mental illness is, guys, I do realize that I made a video called Challenging Mental Illness, but I do accept that mental illness exists, okay? But the reason I make the challenging videos is because, one, everything I'm challenging is something that's within myself, and I like to challenge myself. So if you take offense to it, I understand, because people have said things to me about my stuff that offends me, and I always had to question, like, why is that upsetting me? And I'm going to give you an example of, like, one thing that made me, like, mad. So, but what it looks like now is I still have episodes, guys. Some of them involve me hitting a joint a couple of times, which, you guys, it does make the episodes worse. So, but I've had some where I wasn't doing anything, and I've had some that with sleep deprivation. In my A Time for Rest video, I talked about the incident by the canal with the police and the paramedic, where I was meditating and talking to the voices, right? And felt the demon and the angel. I think I talked about that in depth. If not, I'll go back and watch it because it's an interesting story too. So I had that incident. There was no drugs involved in that, but sleep deprivation might have been a factor because I was walking from San Diego to Phoenix, Arizona, right? So I didn't get the best amount of sleep, so it could have been sleep deprivation, which is why after I was around society again, I started to feel crazy, and I called a family member. They picked me up, and I made the Time for Rest video because I took back the label of schizoaffective and not spiritual. So that was one that happened, and that was about 3 months ago. I'm going to be honest with you guys about, like, what was happening while I was making the videos. You know, me walking cross country, which obviously I'm not doing for a couple of reasons. Not because I don't want to. Like, that would be a cool lifestyle choice, I think, to just walk across the country. But there's always an ulterior motive with me, guys. It's not just as easy as this is just what I want to do. In the back of my head, I have 1,000 reasons why I'm doing what I'm doing. And if I tell you, they don't make sense, so I don't tell you, okay? But I'm going to tell you now because I don't care. I don't care. So, while I was making all the past videos 2 months ago, every second of every day, I was talking to the voices. Okay, guys? And I think I said in my, I said in one of my videos, I don't remember what it was, where, did I describe how I talked to them? Maybe I was writing about it. I don't know, guys. But I could, like, verbally talk to them like I talk to you guys, or I could talk to them in my head, because they're in my head, right? So I could be sitting here like this, having a complete conversation with all these voices, right? So the voices, they did name themselves, guys, so I'm going to tell you what they are. The one that talked to me the most did label themselves as God, okay? So I thought I was talking to God, and I didn't think that was a bad thing. I thought, and still kind of believe, that anybody could talk to God if they truly want to, but I asked them to stop talking to me, please, because they were micromanaging my life, okay? And it got exhausting. My life was probably looking better, but it was exhausting. So I asked them to stop, and do they stop? Sometimes. Sorry, I'm listening to the real people. but, so the one that talked the most was God. And you guys, when I listen to music, part of the delusion is that I do believe that God is speaking to me through music. And it's not that I don't realize that the artists are real people and that they wrote their own songs for their own experiences, but in my delusion, I do believe that it's God literally speaking to me in a more audible way, because I can actually talk back to it. And it's weird, guys, and I know that it's weird, and that's why mental illness, one of my other points was mental illness versus spirituality, which I'm going to talk about a little bit. So it gets kind of exhausting to never have, like, true silence in your life. Some of the other voices that labeled themselves was Jesus and Buddha, which is why I like them both. So, I mean, obviously my mind would talk to both of them. Also, my grandfather, who I talked about in Breaking Religious Boundaries videos, I've heard his voice. And then there was one time where I heard a symphony of voices, like they were singing to me. And I said, who is that? And they said, the martyrs. And I was like, which martyrs? And they said, all martyrs. And I asked them what that meant, because, you guys, when I was a kid growing up, we talked about martyrdom a lot. So they pretty much told me anybody who was murdered is a martyr, because they got murdered for somebody else's belief. It didn't have to be a Christian being murdered because they were Christian, or, you know, it could be anybody who was murdered because of somebody else's belief. They were all martyrs. So they were singing to me. It was a weird experience. It was kind of cool, though. So this was happening daily. I was living a weird life while this was happening. The routine was the same, and, you know, I don't regret it, and I still do stuff from the routine sometimes just because it gives me a sense of purpose. Because, you guys, I'm not working right now because I can't really hold a job. I'm gonna explain. The last job that I had, I was walking there to work, and then the voices were telling me, you need to go to South Dakota. So I walked right past my job and just went and had a no call, no show. And the thing is, they would have taken me back because I am a good worker, guys, but I no called, no showed on them 3 times because of the delusions that I just felt bad for not being reliable, so I just quit. So that happened. Another recent hallucination I had was, you guys, I have what I call my fire drill episodes, and what a fire drill episode is me getting ready for the end of the world, like it's gonna happen now. Okay? So I collect everything I need. When this is happening, you see me collecting, like, hoarding food and water and going to my safe place, which is, I'm not telling you about that. But the most recent fire drill episode I had was because I was watching TV, and obviously it was talking to me, because why wouldn't it be? Obviously. So I was watching TV, and there was, I don't like saying names, but it was a show about, is he a therapist? But he helps people with problems, okay? And he was talking to a certain person on his show, and I believed that they were the Antichrist. And I believed that they knew that I knew that they were the Antichrist, and that they knew that I was watching them, right? So I started to panic. The show ended, and then a commercial came on for another show with these cartoon men. And they were in a hospital, and they looked out the window, and the world was, like, not, it was deserted. Okay. So in my delusion, I'm thinking, oh man. And they look at me and they're like, you need to find us. You need to be with us. So I was like, okay, guys, this happened 2 weeks ago. So I do a fire drill and get everything I need, go to my safe place. That way I can wait it out until the end so that I can go find these people. Obviously, you guys, that never happens. I always wake up the next day like, what was that? And I wake up tired. This is kind of what the episodes look like. Also, guys, on the canal episode where I was talking about the meditating and listening to the voices, was the reason I sat in the first place is because they showed me the end, okay? Like, I was far away from civilization, but they showed me it getting, like, bombed and stuff. And I was crying because I thought my family had just died, because I was nowhere near my family, but I thought, like, literally everybody around me was dying, and that I was only safe because I was going on this random-ass long walk, and I should have been dying with them. So that happened too. And I have episodes like these a lot, guys. I try to stay away from the weed because it definitely makes it worse. But even when I don't have weed, I still have this type of mindset, this mentality of the end of the world. Now, I think my reason for that is because, one, the way I was raised around doomsdayers. Every conversation ended with how the world was going to end and what we're going to do about it and preparing for the end of the world, okay? So I can understand why that is a main factor in my delusions, is because that's just what I've been growing up with. The religious delusions, raised in a church, the martyrdom. You guys, when I was like 5, they were telling us that we needed to die martyrs and to be ready for it. So just, that was kind of what I was conditioned to believe, and my delusions take form in that way, okay? It is what it is. So when I'm out of the delusion, I realized it was a delusion because the sun came up again. People are still going to work. Cars are still driving by. Nobody was bummed. But when I'm living in that, guys, when I'm living in that, there's nothing you can do to convince me otherwise. Even though I've done it 15, 16 times, and every time it doesn't happen, while I'm in that, you can never tell me that the world's not ending. But when I'm normal like this, and we talk about my stories, we laugh about them because it's funny. Okay? So that's just a little bit of the schizoaffective diagnosis. Okay? Before I end it is at 37:21. I might edit it, but I did write on here mental illness versus spirituality, and it's because I was watching a video 2 days ago about someone else living with schizophrenia, just recording themselves in their apartment, and they were writing stuff, and they said a lot of people with schizophrenia are either witches or just too close to the spiritual world, but then they put in quotes, except for Christians, okay? So I was like, okay, I don't know what that's about, but I can accept that a lot of people who are very close to spirituality do have more of a, it's like we've been touched by God. So I don't know what the connection is with that, but you guys, when I live worldly, we'll just say that, you know, doing what society says I should do, being on medication, working a 9-5, just being selfish, you know, doing me, I don't have those problems. And every time I try to get close to God or something, because I was raised that way, like, I feel like part of me will always want a relationship with a higher power. Whenever I get close to that, the episodes start to happen more and more and more and more and more. So the correlation, I don't know what that looks like. I know that the meds help it stop. I don't know, guys. It is what it is. So the reason I'm talking about it is because, you know, they are having this whole mental health awareness stuff all the time. And a lot of people do try to talk about it. I do notice that most people watch the videos when they're actually having the episodes. And you guys, I can't record videos when I'm having episodes because the paranoia is out of control. Okay, obviously there's a camera on there. It's watching me. My phone, you guys, I turn it off. I turn everything off, and I go dark. Like, I can't record it. It's not possible. Also, the paranoia, guys. That's an interesting one, too, because I was that person who thought that the mailman and like the Amazon people were watching me, so I would like hide from them. And then at one point I realized that me acting suspicious because I thought they were suspicious looked suspicious, so people were actually watching me, so I learned how to be less suspicious. And then I learned to realize that, I'm not that special, but sometimes the paranoia is crazy, guys. The reason I'm not afraid of horror movies is because my life tends to turn into one. When I'm sober, guys, I do hear stuff all the time, but I don't pay attention to it because I don't want my mind or my world to turn into like The Conjuring, and I think it's when they pay attention to it that it becomes crazy. So I just ignore it and try to fall asleep while it's happening. Mental illness, spirituality, I don't know, guys. Both, I don't know. But that's my experience with mental illness and a little bit of spirituality. So, let's see here. I checked off mental history. I did honesty, pros, and cons a little bit. Mental illness versus spirituality. So there's other ones I want to do. It was delusional thinking, the predatory mind, and freedom versus fear. So I'm going to turn this one off and do another video, and I'll probably do those three together. So.